may be in a situation of life and death, are we allowed to violate the Torah even though the particulars are against the Torah? For example, if something is not kosher, am I allowed to use this as a medicine? We know that there are certain Christian groups who believe that ingestion of blood is prohibited, and therefore they're not allowed to have a transfusion. Now, this is their own interpretation, as novel as it might be, but the Torah prohibits the eating of blood, not the absorption of blood. There may be some rabbinic prohibition against it. Certainly when it comes to loss of life, there is no prohibition against it. On the contrary, let me just describe to you in brief something that you may not know. There is a verse in Leviticus which says that these are the commandments that the person shall do, and he shall live by them. What does it mean, and he shall live by them? Usually you say he should live by them, he should live with them, and this should be part of his life. But the rabbis see this in an altogether different life. The rabbis in the Talmud say, v'chai bohem, he should live with them, and not that he should die by them, that no commandment should cause the death of a person of Israel, that in the process of performing the commandments, that this should bring out a person's death. And the whole question of martyrdom arises, well, how come there's so many hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Jewish martyrs? That's a different discussion. Let me just address the concept so that you can understand. The principle that governs Jewish commandments is that we are creatures of God, and as such, because we've been created by the creator of all, of you and the whole universe, we have an obligation to sanctify God's name. Now, therefore, in order to sanctify God's name, we have to show that we're not afraid of anyone outside. We're not afraid of Stalin, we're not afraid of Hitler, we're not afraid of Torquemada. It's easier said than done. People who are faced with those situations, many people could not face up to those situations, and they compromised. But others, the majority of the Jewish people over the period of the last 2,000 years, were martyred if faced with these kinds of situations. The reason for that is that we are obligated to show that we're not afraid of anyone outside of God, and if necessary, we would give our lives for our beliefs. That said, the commandment is not to commit harikari, suicide. The commandment is to sanctify God's name. It is not sanctifying God's name if by not eating something that's not kosher you die. If by not taking a transfusion, or even if you had to eat it, you would die, that's not sanctifying God's name. That's saying that God wants you to die, wants you to have a commandment, and since God knows everything, gives you that commandment, knowing that it'll bring to your death. There couldn't be anything more outrageous than this, and this would bring the people rejecting the Torah and rejecting the Jewish God. This is not honoring God's name. And this is the principle of Maimonides. The reason why we are not to perform harikari for any commandment, except in certain cases, certain limited cases, is because we're obligated to live. We're supposed to sanctify God's name, not desecrate it. If performance of the commandment will lead to the death of a person, they would say these guys are religious fanatics, which is what they say about those Christians. And the reason why it's stated that way, these are the commandments that a person shall do and he shall live by them, indicates that this is a condition of the commandment. That only if the commandment will not affect the life of the person, only then can the commandment be said to be relevant. Otherwise, there is no relevance to the commandment. The commandment is totally evaporated at that particular point because the person's life is in danger. And so, my friends, if there's a question of a transfusion, or even if you have to eat the blood, by all means you have to do so in order to save a life. It is only when people are trying to convert the person and to change their religions viciously that the person there has to stand up for principle, and that sanctifies God's name.